Hello and welcome to Talos All Sigils in 4252. Um, this run took about 3 weeks of practice from basically never having run this category, but I've been following this game for a while, so it wasn't super unfamiliar. That said, this route, or at least for the most part, the strats that I'm going for, the tricks that I'm using, are focusing on consistency. I really dislike resetting, so in general you're going to see me doing some very slow things. This start of the game, for example, is like 10 seconds slower to get to outnumbered than the fastest route, but it means that I can almost always get to outnumbered, which is really nice. The main tricks you're going to see used in this run are item jumps and variations thereof. That's what you see me doing when I drop an item at my feet and jump and pick it up again almost all the time. In particular, that trick is called a nozu jump. So this here is a simple item jump. Just put down an item and jump, and then in particular you're able to pick it up again. This is a nozu jump. I click, you can see my inputs in the bottom right, but I'm going to click to drop the item, then click to pick it up, and then jump again. It gets you a little bit more height in some places. I don't think we really know why. In particular, it lets you do this. You can get up barriers with a connector or a jammer, which is really helpful because there's barriers basically everywhere, and so it just turns every barrier into the game into an elevator, or a ladder basically. This route through A1 is relatively new. It's like 5-6 months old. It just lets you retain your spawn checkpoint. It's kind of a nice route, but it means that A1 in particular is single segment. You can't screw something up too badly or you're going to lose a lot of progress. Most of the game, like A3 here, you saw I walked through a purple barrier, that gets me a checkpoint. I'm just going to get a bunch of sigils, and then I'm going to reset back to that checkpoint. Or reset back to spawn. Resetting between levels is sort of nice because it means that you have a lot more of an ability to practice. And it means if things go wrong, there's only so wrong that they can go, because you can always just go back to the checkpoint. Here's one of the few sigils we really get intended. I guess arguably the star we just got was intended, but I've just pushed 2 buttons there, which will lower the water level and let us get to the star that's underground. That was a really slow jammer grab. I still went for it though. There's a mine there, and the cycle is somewhat consistent because you've reset checkpoint not too long ago. All of the objects in the world return to their original state when you reset checkpoint. But you only have so much time, and if you are really slow on the buttons or are really slow at grabbing the jammer there, it hurts. I think that's a count of 2 for intended, at least by my count. This is the other major sort of sequence break we're going to use, where you just sort of step on some geometry and can jump on the walls. The game has a lot of this sort of random rubble everywhere. It makes it look kind of inhabited, or I guess not empty, but it also is really great for just sort of jumping on walls and breaking the game. I just unlocked connector. I don't actually need it for A2. A2 doesn't have any connectors in it. They only show up in A4, but A2 is closer to the connector unlock spot than A4, and that plus some other movement just means it's fastest to get it there. This is another one of those chain a bunch of levels together. Basically there's this jammer that I'm going to use to just gain height. I'm doing a bunch of nozu jumps where I click and jump again. The advantage of gaining a little bit more height, plus it means I keep the jammer in hand, so I can just keep reusing it to gain height, so I don't have to go get another item. It's one of the main reasons why we'll chain levels together when there isn't an item that's neatly accessible from near the spawn point. It really tends to be faster to chain the sigils together. Here's A4. This is the connector level. Connectors, again, function just like jammers. They're just a little bit less common in the world. Especially in the early game, jammers are a very popular object, and connectors aren't. Connectors are, the intended use is to connect lasers. I don't think we're going to see that very much. I think we're going to see it in this world and then probably never again. So here I'm going to use the connectors again with these barriers. If I sort of put them in front of me at a light angle, it'll gain me a bunch of height. It's a little bit different from what I'm going to do elsewhere. This level's intended. You can do the same thing I just did where you jump up these two barriers, but on average it takes longer to do that. I think optimally it's faster, along with for these two levels. This is Don't Cross the Streams, and the next level, which is above all that. It is faster to go up the barriers with the connector, but it's a hell of a lot harder. And I'm not that interested in saving 2 or 3 seconds. As you can tell, this early game is considerably better than my last PB, and I haven't done anything really crazy here. Just mostly played decently well. And now we're going to get Cube. This is the second to last item we're actually going to get this run. Items are really useful. In particular, connector is really useful because it's a replacement for the jammer. It's an item that lets you gain height. Cubes are really useful for reasons you'll see later. And then the final one we get is fan, which isn't required, but it winds up saving us time. And again, I'll mention it when we get there. So here's, once again, these Nozu jumps. The other thing I probably should mention is these jumps are FPS dependent. So if you look in the top right corner of my screen, you can see my current frame rate. I'm really struggling with that. Holy cow. I'm getting 400 frames a second. That's also why this game looks terrible. All of the settings are as low as possible because we want to squeeze every inch of frame rate out of this as we can. Because the more frame rate you get, the more height you get. There are times when you can get too much height, but in general, more height's a good thing. Once again, connector, climbing walls. It's a little bit of a weird kind of item jump. You space yourself, you're going to see it again here. You space yourself away from the wall, you place the item, and then sort of move backwards and jump. Not exactly certain what my inputs are. Yeah, you hold backwards and jump, and it like pushes you up the incline slightly differently so you don't get stuck. We're just going to do this twice here. It is possible to bring the connector with you and then leave from bichromatic entanglement, but again, it's a case of you're giving yourself more work, and I don't even think it saves a considerable amount of time. You can run on the tops of... Wow, that was sketchy. You can run on the tops of barriers, but not on the tops of fences. So you'll see I run over the blue barrier there, but jumped over the fences. Just because it was... there was a good chance I was going to fall if I did it. At lower frame rates, actually, the physics are more consistent. So you can run on top of things that are a little bit less stable, and you're less likely to get randomly thrown around the world. I don't know if it happened this run, but I'll mention it if it does. Sometimes you get a ridiculous frame rate issue. I'm not even sure what causes it. I think maybe you get clipped into the geometry for a frame or something, and the game just sort of throws you off. This is one of the biggest time saves using level geometry. It's called wall jump. It's a very imaginative name. No, I missed it there. You saw it the first half, but the goal is to get a continuation jump there. And anyway, this is another one of those cases of just step on the right bit of geometry and jump onto the walls. And, gains you a bunch of height. It gets you out of bounds. Sorry, I guess it doesn't gain you height. It gets you somewhere you aren't really supposed to go, and then you can just jump to the sigils. This would be 4 for the intended count. And now you're going to get to see the power of cubes. So, if 300 frame rate is a lot, I am going to go down to 60 here, and I apologize for the Chinese, but there is a reason for it. I'm limiting my frame rate here because I'm going to pull off a trick called a cube jump. Again, very imaginatively named because we're going to use a cube and we're going to jump. But I put the cube on one side of the barrier for myself, grab the cube. Oh, you're kidding. I failed it. That's miserable. It's like 15 seconds lost, I think. Put the cube on one side of the barrier, stand on the other, click, and then hold spacebar. And you'll just get launched. And you get launched proportional to your 13 seconds. Launch proportional to your frame rate. So we always go down to low frame rate for cube jumps, because otherwise you just go flying. There are a couple of moments where it's okay to go flying, but they're few and far between. Here we're going to grab paint. I'll talk a little bit more about the complexities of paint later, but paint is a lot like jammers and connectors. You stick it against the right kind of wall, and you gain height. Again, I'm going to be mostly Nozu jumping with it. Paint gives you, in general, just a lot more height than connectors or jammers. I don't know if we really have any good argument for why that is. The best guess we have is that it's smaller. But anyway, another really powerful breaking the game, getting out of bounds item. In general, height tends to break puzzle games, especially puzzle games that have non-infinite walls. So again, just sort of climbing up a wall that's supposed to be totally inaccessible. Here I'm going to be a little bit cautious, but we can skip most of the puzzle by just being on the walls. I'm going to go grab paint again for the last couple of items. The disadvantage of it being a smaller item is it sometimes drops where you don't want it to be. And that's all of A. A really good time for A would be like a 10.
Rejoice, child.
My general goal is something like a 10:30. Oh, that was a miserable gate puzzle. I have a 10:45 here, exiting A. If I'd maintained that minus 15 I had earlier, that would have been a 10:30. No, that would have been a 10:20, so that would actually have been a really good time. But again, I don't really like resetting, so I'm happy to just keep going here, even though it was a bit of a sloppy ending. I haven't really touched on this, but that trick there is called an elevator skip. I'll mention it again when we leave B, but I'm doing a weird thing with the buttons, and it lets me get a checkpoint really early. Oh, I got early paint. Lets me get a checkpoint really early, and I can restart checkpoint, and I can skip the entire elevator ride. It's a very long thing. So, this particular world, B1, has 3 different locations paint can spawn. Fortunately, all 3 of them are along our path. One of them is by spawn, one of them is by windows through a door, the level we were just in, and one of them is at the end, by Road of Death. Paint only ever spawns in one. Once it's spawned, it won't move, and that means that all I have to do is basically count to 3 to figure out which one it's in. It means there's a little bit of variability in these golds. Wow, that's pretty miserable. This is a nosy jump that I don't quite get enough FPS for. I really want more like 470. I have 420 there. I think if my timing was a bit better, it seems to matter when you click and when you hit space for these jumps. If my timing is a bit better, it might work more easily, but it's still fast enough to do. As you can tell, I only lost like 5 seconds there. This is a neat skip, but it's not as free as I'd like. There just isn't really another reasonably fast way to get through this area. This is a really neat solution to this puzzle. It is completely intended, you're supposed to, right, like, or not intended, it's completely accepted by sort of the glitchless rules if we were ever going to try and define them. Because using items through purple barriers is an intended mechanic. Even jammers through purple barriers might be intended. I don't know if there's an exact example of that, but... so now we're going to go get Fan. As I said, this is the last item, so the yellow sigils on my screen are going to start building up, and nothing's ever going to happen with them. So I apologize if you like, or if you dislike flashing things. There's going to be a lot of flashing things. This is also intended. So that would be 5. It's just such a simple level to do intended. There are alternatives, but they're not faster. As opposed to this level, which is about a minute intended, whereas using glitches, it's, what, 15 seconds? It's just ridiculous. We're going to break out a jammer. Again, we're going to start chaining levels together. So we're going to do a really awkward item jump here to get up to the Tomb Star. Okay, that's a lot harder than it looks, and it didn't look easy. And then we're going to head over here to Moonshot with some pretty sneaky parkour. I've practiced this a fair bit. The main trick is just inching around this corner and then jumping while holding forward and right. Seems to be very consistent for me. And now I'm going to set up another cube jump. This one's going to be on slow player speed. So I don't know if you noticed last time, but I only changed my frame rate. This time I'm also going to change my player speed. The slower your player speed, the longer it takes for you to move towards the cube, and the further you wind up going. It's odd, but it means that 60 slow is really the preferred setup for cube jumps, just because of how much distance it winds up getting you. Alright, B3, Another really neat level. I'm very fond of B3. It has a lot of really cool stuff. Here we're going to do what's called a 2-cube stack, where, well, we stack 2 cubes on top of each other. We use the sort of corner with that tree. It'll push you on top of the second cube after you get stuck from the first one. And then you can use it along with a cube jump to get into this level. It's one of the few ways to break out a cube at 60 FPS. Right, this trick is called an extended ladder glitch. I'm not going to explain too much of how it works, but the basic idea is we move the ladder over so that it lets us just climb the ladder wherever we want. Some more Nozu jumps here. This is the other way of breaking out a cube, but as this requires an item jump, you can't really do it on 60. These item jumps really do, in general, require 200 FPS or more. And we're just going to do this again. So that was a 10-second time loss there. That was really sloppy. But I'm still not too far off my last run. Oh, my lord. This is just one of the fastest ways to get up here. There are faster ways once you're out of bounds with a cube to get across to where I'm going here, to this sigil. I'm sort of taking the Manhattan distance, the straight perpendicular lines distance, rather than cutting through the middle of the puzzle, which is totally possible, but really scary. So, again, I'm favoring not making mistakes and taking routes. Like, if I fail one of those jumps, one of those Nozu jumps with the cube, I just do it again. It's fine. Alright, so once again, there's a bunch of paint spawns. There are 4 in this world, B4. I got one of the 2 close spawns. A spawn that we call set 1. I'll explain a little bit more about sets in a bit, but the basic idea here is I have paint early, so I broke out a connector, and I don't need to use it. I can just open the Sphinx for the end of the level, and now I'm sort of committed. I can't reset for the entirety of the level, or else I'm going to lose this connector and the Sphinx will close. I need to get the star inside the Sphinx. You can maybe see it as I'm running past here. But paint is not required here. 2 of the paint spawns are much later in the level, and if I get one of those, I'll simply use the connector to climb up these statues instead of paint. And here I'm going to do a trick called a corner climb. At really high FPS, I think this one takes about 400. You can just sort of get stuck in the corner, and the game will just let you jump. I'm not really sure why. It's a really nice thing. There are a couple of places, it's like 4 or 5 places we're going to use it. It's just really, really helpful. Pulling off another cube jump. I'm going to change immediately back to fast and uncapped, just because I need to do a Nozu jump immediately afterwards, and if I change in midair, it loses 0 time. Now I'm going to grab the Sphinx star, and then I'm going to get the last level with another corner climb. The last 2 paint spawns are like on this left-hand side of the Sphinx, so there are routes you can take where you'll use them, and they're not terrible, but I'm not fond of them, again, just because I like doing consistent things. If I had to use the connector earlier in the level, then I would have dropped it in between double plate and redundant power supply to power the Sphinx, and then done the corner climb, same as before. B5. B5 is another chained level. In B5, there's this central obelisk, which has a star on top of it. There are a couple of ways of getting them. One of them is a cube jump. It's decently precise. There are some slightly less precise alternatives, but in general, it's just really, really time-consuming and annoying because it's not consistent. And so instead, what we're going to do is we're going to set up this connector on the wall, and that was powering, I don't know if you saw it, there was a tree in the way. That was powering the receptor on the obelisk. And so we're just going to do the obelisk somewhat intended. I think we're getting a fan blade from somewhere you're sort of not supposed to. I overshot there. I have to do this back up here to get back inbounds. In theory, you can land inside the sigil area, but I missed it. It's like a 10-second time loss, yeah. So we set up that connector really early, so now we need to maintain it, so we can't reset checkpoint anywhere. In particular, that cube jump I just did is kind of scary. There are a couple of ways it can go wrong. There's a little square box you can fall into, and then you have to reset because you can't get out. There's a turret you can die to. if things go really wrong, you can sort of fall into the center of the level, and then you have to back out. It's a bunch of terrible stuff. Here's some more unintended getting on the walls with a cube that's not supposed to work. We've broken out a fan blade. Just for walking time optimization, I'm actually not going to bring it to the center obelisk yet. I'm going to connect this connector instead to the one that I placed on the walls, and just skip this entire level. And then using this fan blade, set up the obelisk, and do the obelisk somewhat intended. I'm hesitant to call this totally intended, but I think given that we have much less intended options, let's up that count to 6. Call it 6 intended solutions. Ooh, this is a neat one. This trick is called a fan slide. So I'm gonna do a weird thing there called a guided slide, which is where I pause and then hold jump to get a guided jump, where those 2 feet appear and it just jumps you onto the location. You'll see me using them a lot, especially to get on the walls. Except that because I'm paused, instead of jumping me, it instead slides me linearly there. Okay, fine. Then what I do is I spam the jump key, this is embarrassing, to sort of get a second jump onto the fan blade, and the combination of those two things just shoots me forward off of the fan really, really fast, and then I get that guided jump that I've been mashing spacebar for onto the actual wall at the edge of Alley the Pressure Plates. It's a really neat strat. We use it in 2 places in the run. It's just a really powerful trick. The main problem is there aren't a lot of floor fans that we have easy access to. Mostly fans are used as blockers or are used to send you, to launch you places. They're at a diagonal. This is a pretty good B6. In particular, Egyptian Arcade went well. It's a level that can go wrong in a lot of ways. There are turrets. You can die to them. I hope you can picture how that goes wrong. But yeah, I'm really fond of fan slides. It's a really cool trick. Again, unfortunately, an uncapped only trick takes about 300 FPS, maybe a bit more. Speaking of fans, Fan Across Forever does have a floor fan, but I don't think it's easy to get to. No, it is easy to get to. I don't think it's that helpful. Might be something to look into. Here we're going to use a cube jump. It's not actually required. It just saves us a bunch of walking distance. And then we're going to get this star. Again, I'm going to count this to the intended count. Maybe not completely accurate, but so that would make 8. Wait, did I lose count? It's either 8 or 7. I think it's 7. Let's go with 7. Just because there are, again, ways of getting that with a cube jump. So the obelisk star and the pylon star, the one in B7 that we just got, are 2 of the stars that you don't need fan for, but they're really helpful to have fan for. You can get them with cube jumps. The cube jumps aren't that precise, but they're not great. B7's a pretty straightforward level. The only thing of interest there is that I used a connector that I broke out of a Fan Across Forever to jam one of the turrets. A whole lot of jamming does have 3 jammers in it, but getting to them is really slow. It's just a really big level. So it's much preferable to break out the jammer. And the same thing here, we're going to just chain this item through a bunch of levels. This last level, Big Lump of Mine, only has cubes. So there's no really great way to get up onto the walls. You can use cubes for Nozu jumps sometimes, but not always. So I've saved a bunch of time here, mostly just by playing pretty cleanly. There are a couple of things that I screwed up pretty badly last run that I managed to not screw up this run. So that's always a good feeling. And this represents about the midpoint of the run. It's like a little bit past the midpoint of the run. And this is our first Star World. So this category is all sigils, which means all the red, yellow, and green sigils, but also the 9 gray sigils. And I guess technically also the 30 stars. 30 stars are sort of implied in the gray sigils, not quite. There are some ways to get the gray sigils without the stars, but we're just gonna nab everything. So these Star Worlds are, I think, casually a lot harder than most of the other puzzles. Definitely all the other puzzles that aren't the tower. but in a speedrun, they can be cheesed pretty hard. So this is 2 corner climbs here, just to beat, what was that, merry-go-round and cat's cradle. Just jump into the right corner and mash your way through. It's makes B-Star a really comforting level. It's a nice halfway point. It's sort of funny, but it feels like this game has either levels that are very hard, have a bunch of hard puzzles in them, or levels that are just very easy. There are very few like levels that have exactly one really hard puzzle. It's either everything or nothing. I think it's because the thing that makes it hard isn't the individual puzzle. It's usually oh my lord. My sigil solutions have been pretty bad this run. Usually the thing that makes it hard is chaining the levels, chaining the puzzles together, carrying an item from one puzzle to the other, and then not being allowed to make a mistake, or else you're going to lose the item. This is one more kind of jump. No, not going to do it here. I'll mention it later. There is one more kind of item jump I haven't mentioned, but I don't do it here. I do it in C4, I think. This is just more Nozu jumps. Ah, no, I do it here. The last kind of jump is called a perfect item jump. So as opposed to putting the item directly at your feet, in a perfect item jump, you place, almost always we do it with connector, decently far away from you. It seems like you sort of stare at the base of the third leg. You'll see the line up here, approximately. And it gets you a lot of height, like a lot more height than a Nozu jump most of the time. Oh, I fell here, that's a shame. Fortunately, there's a nice quick backup. It's useful on some trees where you really need like all the height you can get. Most of the time, though, a Nozu jump will get you enough height. And again, it's a lot of these jumps are going to be to preference. Your frame rate will vary, and depending on how good your frame rate is, it'll affect how comfortable you are with certain jumps and if you have to do easier versions of them. The good thing about this game is, given how broken it is, there's a lot of backups for basically everything. For example, this level, I'm about to do a really long cube jump. It's going to get me on the walls, but if I fell inside the level, if I was a little bit further left, or if I bounced in an awkward way off of one of the walls, there are like 2, maybe even 3 backups now that'll let me get to the sigil area just because I have a cube in my hands. But C1 has... I don't know, C1 feels hard, but I think it doesn't screw me up as much as I feel like it does. Alright, C3. This is our second and last fan slide of the run. Here we're going to just turn on the fan, just to get the fan slide. But again, it's the same inputs. It's guided slide by pausing, and then holding spacebar, and then unpausing. And then, once you've started the slide animation, you mash spacebar until you get launched. Here we're going to use a little bit of a small paint jump. It just doesn't get us a lot of height for some reason. And then some neat parkour to get the star and the sigil. Definitely not intended, but very nice to be able to do. I'm going to go grab this paint. I'm actually going to carry it through the level. It's not required. There is a much faster way to do, in particular Big Stairs, Little Stairs, which is the last level in this world. But I'm not bad at it, I just find it really inconsistent. And I don't like the pressure, especially this late in the run. There's a little bit more than 10 minutes. It's like 15 minutes left in the run most of the time. I had a really good ending, so it's a little bit less than that. But instead, I can bring paint and use this tree, and I get like 500 FPS there, so it just works out. It's like 5-6 seconds slower, but it's acceptable. So let me talk a little bit about paint spawns. I mentioned that there were 4 spawns in B4, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. There's actually a total of 5 what we call sets of spawns. So one of those spawns, it's one of the close spawns, is actually 2 separate sets. And what I mean by set is when you have set 1, for example, the set that I have right now, it is a paint spawn in 5, no, maybe closer to 15 actually, different worlds, all of which are going to have the same particular spawn point. Set 1 corresponds to that particular spawn point in all of those worlds. Set 2 corresponds to a different particular spawn point in all of those worlds. And so we don't use paint in that many worlds. There was a period of time where we used paint in a lot of worlds, but eh, words are failing me because I'm trying to watch myself do this run. Knowing where paint is actually very important, because if you have to check all 4 spawn points, oh my god, yeah, I forgot how miserable this was. If you have to check all 4 spawn points, you're going to be running around the world a lot. It's actually going to lose a lot of time. So knowing exactly where paint is without having to look for it saves a bunch of time. I'm going to change to 60 here, mostly just because I need it in the next level, C star, but also because I'm going to do a couple of bump jumps in this world. I'll mention them when we get there. At any rate, so the advantage of paint, I check in B4, and then I get an extra Q in... what world is it? I'm not sure I actually remember exactly what world it is, but B4 tells me half, and then there's another world I can use, or maybe there's 2 other worlds I can use to differentiate if I have 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, which are the 5 spawn sets we know of. 0 is a very special paint set, which affects 6 other worlds in a very awkward way, and so you will know if you have it. This is a bump jump. It looks like what it is. You run at a little bump on the ground, some rocks, there are a lot of them. In fact, you can do it on almost any height change. And you just jump somewhere around the apex when you're gaining height. We're pretty sure it's, or at least I'm pretty sure it's frame perfect, because the lower your frame rate, the easier it is. I'm going to do a couple more of them. Here's this second star world. But bump jumps are a really powerful trick because of how often they can be used, but they're very frustrating. They're often extremely inconsistent. And I did my best to limit the use of them because I really dislike them.
Since the first word.
C star is a little bit of a harder level, even casually, than B star. So I'm going to do a pretty tight cube jump here. I have a pixel on the ground that I'm looking at and a pixel on the wall that I'm looking at, and the end result is that almost all the time I'm going to land close enough to this sigil where I can adjust. So if you push backwards or left or right in midair, you can adjust your cube jump just a little bit, but often you only need just a little bit. The last 2 sigils are fairly easy once you have this item jump. Landing on top of barriers is actually quite challenging and feels a little bit luck-based. So I again try to avoid it if possible. Alright. C7. C7 is an interesting level. We're going to do sort of a combination of intended things and unintended things. It's one of the few levels where we actually use mechanics. Here's another barrier to get on top of. I did not do a very good job of this, but if you see at the top of my splits, possible time save, I did a miserable job of it in PB, so I got a little bit frustrated here when I was doing this live, but it was still better than my PB, so I was still pretty happy with it. Again, this is a perfect item jump. You can see on the wireframe of the connector, or at least you could the first time when I actually took the time to set it up, my crosshair is over the sort of very bottom of the third leg, and it gets me just a humongous amount of height. Here I'm gonna do, yeah, I still saved like 30 seconds on that split. Here I'm gonna do another Nozu. I'm trying to break out this connector. It's again pretty tight to do. This tree is not super useful. I'm gonna steal a laser from carrier pigeons because it's a blue laser. There is a blue laser in this level in Dead Man's Switch, but it's awkward to get to, and this is just ridiculously fast. And I can just basically beat the entire level with it. And now I'm going to go to 15 for another bump jump. As I said, they get easier the lower your frame rate. Well, at 15 FPS, there's only 4 frames in a second. No, that's not true. There's 15 frames in a second. It's 4 times easier than 60, and yet this bump jump is still hard. And then this is arguably... Nah, I think this is probably second easiest level in the game. Carrier pigeons. They increased the timer on the laser activation there. Oh, I screwed up my FPS. I was at 60 there. Oops. They increased the timer on the laser activation there, so now if you reset checkpoint, you can just beat the level. It's just not a problem. This is definitely the easiest level in the game, Messenger Garden. There's 1 star here. There's an invisible bridge, but you learn where it is. It's not too bad.
Those who have discovered the holiest mysteries of my garden may come to serve me as blessed
I was talking about,
messengers.
oh yeah, so jumping up trees in particular. A lot of objects, the walls and the barriers, they aren't very precise how you jump up them, but trees only have one particular spot. One, I hate to call it corner of a tree, but when you're at low graphics, they do really have corners, and well, only one of the corners actually works, generally speaking. You need to point yourself at that one corner of the tree, and you will be able to go up it. You'll see that a little bit here for stables. This is another combo level. I'm going to start by grabbing the star. I'm going to do... This is another really neat strat. This strat's called a cube tilt. I think this is the only place we've ever found it works. But cubes, when they're really, really angled, you can't stand on them. But if they're not too angled, you can still stand on them, and then you can get a guided jump. And so they give you a bit of extra height, even though they're really not supposed to, and you can just get through the exit there. I'm going to set up another cube jump here. We really don't do a lot of cube jumps in this run. There are mostly really good alternatives. This cube jump is really sketchy. So I'm going to drop the cube next to me. You sort of run into the cube if you do that, and then lose all your momentum so I don't slide off the roof. And once again here, I'm going to keep in mind where paint is, because I know I've set one, I know it's on the right-hand side, and so I can just get it immediately. Alright, stables. Here's a tree. There's a very particular part of the tree, which is right next to the bush, which is the only part of the tree I can jump up. The same is true here. This is armory. I'm going to do another perfect item jump, and again, there's this little corner there that I was looking at. I know I wasn't staring at it for very long. I'm sorry. I'm trying to go quickly. At this point, I know I've got a pretty good run going, and I want to do well. So trees, in fact, have sort of fallen out of favor a little bit as the ideal way to gain height, but there are times where there really isn't a better option. This is a level where there is a better option, or there is another option, but it's really not very fun. So I'm doing this nosy jump here. I have 511 FPS, and I still am not quite getting up the wall. Mostly because my positioning on the tree wasn't very good. And here again, I'm looking at a very specific spot on the tree. There's 2 corners, and it's the right-hand one. I'm removing this fan blade here so I don't get launched. Otherwise, jumping on top of it would be a death sentence. I'd fall into the level, and I'd have to go through the whole sequence again. But that's a really neat skip for that level. As you can see here, these levels intended require recorder and platform, but we just sort of get to skip all of that with cubes. I'm going to grab paint for one last sigil. This will be red sigil 49, which is good. It means I know I have all of them. Only 8 stars. There's 2 stars in the Nexus that I don't have. And at this point I'm at really good pace. My goal for this run was a sub 43, so this was that pace. So the whole point here, the whole goal here is just let's not lose more time. Yeah, there's 2 stars in the tower. You can see them, star 25 and star 28. One of them is on floor 3 and one of them is on floor 0. The floor 3 star is intended to be grabbed from floor 5. There's a nice drop down from floor 5. It gives you some guided momentum. We're not going to do any of that. Also, floor 1. Did I solve floor 1 intended? Yeah, I did. I was scared this run. If you make that jump that I was trying to line up, you can get on top of the walls. And from there, you can just parkour all the way across the top of the floor 1 puzzle directly to this terminal. And once you're at this terminal, the game doesn't care. You're all set. You can interact with it and unlock the floors. So I'm just going to unlock floor 3 directly. I have the reds for all the floors, but I don't need any other ones. In particular, the floor 3 code is pasted on a sticky note. Since that's a fixed texture in the game, it doesn't ever change. It's always 215, so I can just input that quickly. And here's that floor skip. I forgot to talk about this earlier, but you push the floor you're currently on, which starts a half-second timer, and then you push the floor you want to go to, which puts the elevator in a thinks it's not moving state, and then you push the floor you want to go to again. The elevator, quote unquote, arrives, and then you get your checkpoint and you restart checkpoint. It's pretty great. Okay, there's like a pixel here where I can grab the jammer. It's precise, but you get it eventually. And here I'm going to go down to 15 FPS to do a clip. So actually just by dropping this jammer at a reasonably precise spot, and then jumping sort of in rhythm with my character, I just push myself out of bounds. I'm not super certain how it works. My best guess is that when you drop the jammer, it forces your character through the wall for a couple of frames, and if you jump during one of those frames, you then are jumping out of bounds, and once you're out of bounds, the game just sort of slides you over. And there's a gap in that wall in particular by floor 3 where the star is, and so you can just sort of sneak your way through that gap. You don't really go out of bounds since we've never gone through a wall completely with it, but you can go around walls because your character has a much smaller hitbox while you're out of bounds.
You have proven.
And the floor 0 puzzle, again, we're cheesing a little bit. You're really not supposed to use a jammer for it. You're supposed to use 2 connectors and the axe from C, and yeah, it's really slow. That was pretty clean. That was the one good official puzzle of the game, I think, of the run. This is a star. We're going to use this axe here in lieu of a connector or a paint can. There is paint in this world, but it's farther away, and you have to remember where it is. The axe is right there. We're going to use this axe for all 3 levels in A star. So you may have noticed that this is one of the few levels where when I walked in from out of bounds, it actually gave me a checkpoint. You can see the sigil appears on my screen and the name, though I know you can't read the name because it's in Chinese. I need to bring the axe with me, unfortunately. So I'm actually going to walk back here to get the checkpoint because I need to restart checkpoint after this sigil, after Nerve Wrecker, and then use the axe for jammed from within. And if I just grab the sigil and reset, otherwise I would be returned to spawn, which is farther away from the axe. And that's all 129 sigils. I have only 35 reds because I used, what would it be, 14 in the tower? Oh, I screwed that up. I might not have actually. I think I did actually grab -1 there. Anyway, that was the last big mistake of the run, was having to reset there. This category requires ending at the 100% ending, which is the messenger ending. You might be thinking this is the wrong way to go for the messenger ending. Well, actually, it is the right way to go. I need to go into the tower, but instead of actually unlocking floor 6, even though I have the grays to get it, we're going to do a tower clip. So there are 2 tower clips we know of, 3 tower clips we know of. One at floor 2, there's one at floor 1, one at floor 2, and one at floor 3, and one at floor 4. It's honestly every single floor of the tower. The one at floor 3 is itemless, and that makes it the fastest. You don't have to grab anything else to do the clip. It's just get there, and then you're clipped in. There's just a hole in the side of the wall. I'm going to line up with a pixel here and drop onto this beam, which has collision. In this category, it is okay if I fall into the center area, because I have the grays to unlock the hub, to unlock the floor 6 door, but I don't need them.
It is now
And that's time 42:52.
time to choose.
Wow, that was a blast of a run. Yeah, I'm really happy with that run. I made some bad mistakes. There were a couple of sketchy moments, in particular in early game. I was like plus 10 out of the early game, and I think I was plus 20 at some point in B. But that's totally acceptable. The record for this category is a 39 something. It's insane. It's untouchable for me. I could maybe cut another minute off of this if I kept playing. Like, I definitely have the stamina to keep going, but I want to make sure I can run other Talos things. Any percent in particular is a really interesting category to me, to at least have a good time on the boards. And I think I'm happy enough with this time that I can let it sit for a while. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.